And we're back. So apologies for taking so long to get this next video out. I've been a little bit busy and a little bit lazy. So it's taken me a couple weeks. But anyway, we are on to some rough grinding on this integral and possibly getting the heat treat done. So the first steps are going to be, we're going to take this down to my heat treat thickness. And I haven't quite decided what I'm going to do with the bolster yet. What shape I want to do, I'm not sure. I might just do a traditional, a rounded up toward the front here. But I was also thinking, I don't know if I want to keep it rounded or do an octagonal, kind of like a wash shape. I have no idea. I currently saw a knife by Bob Kramer where he had a pretty cool design where it was tapered pretty far up here, and then the handle, it was tapered at the top and tapered at the bottom, so it had a line basically straight through it, and it created a V type shape here. It's really cool looking. I'm not sure I want to do that. I might just go traditional. But I kind of need to know, because when I start taking this down to thickness, I also need to cut the front of the bolster pretty close to the shape I'm going to end up with. So I'm going to head over to the grinder. I'm going to start taking down some thickness and then refining the profile. I do have a little bit of a cold shut right up here on the top, so I'm probably going to have to take this down a little bit to get that out of there. But shouldn't have too many problems. So on over to the grinder. Because we're going to be taking off forge scale, I'm going to start with a pretty old 36 grit. That way I don't, ruin the nice sharp belts. But once I get through this forge scale, I'll put a sharper belt on here, and it'll help me get the bevels a little bit better. But in the same process as pulling down the thickness, I'm going to be working on the profile as well. So I'm not entirely sure if I've ever mentioned this before, but when you're trying to hog off a lot of material really quickly, you don't want to run flat on the belt. If you run flat on the belt, you're basically just using more surface area, and it's going to be harder to grind into it. I mean, think of it kind of like a car tire. If you have more surface area, it's harder to lose traction. And I guess kind of what we're trying to do is lose traction. So when you're trying to hog off material quickly, just tip this so you're using just the corner of this belt, and it'll take material off a lot quicker. When you get down to the point when you're trying to, make a nice straight bevel, then you want to be a little more flat and consistent on the flat. So as I'm working everything, the profile and taking down the thickness, I've also got to worry about the front of the bolster. So as I'm working all this other stuff, I'm also going to be taking down the bolster and shaping it to the shape that I want to get it down to. When I do integral bolsters, I haven't really done ones where you use the small wheel to get in there and do a radius. Me personally, I don't like that look quite as much as taking it square and then making a shape out of that. Just my preference. If you want to do it with the radius, basically you just have to do it with a small wheel, and you have to be really careful not to dig down into your blade. I know some companies make a little attachment that's got a flat surface and then a small wheel at the end, so it makes it nearly impossible to dig into the flat with the radius. So basically it would be kind of like your platen, where it's flat here and then you have your wheel at the end, but this wheel would be smaller. So this might be a little hard to see, but you can see right down here at the transition, it's not really crisp. It kind of flares out and then goes into the transition into the bolster. So one way you can take care of this to give it a nice crisp corner is you can either use a file to get in there and make a nice corner, or if you have some of these J-Flex belts, all you do is you track your belt over the edge, and then when you push your blade onto here, you can push it this way, and that belt is going to form around that corner and give you a nice little transition in there. So I've got this rough ground, and we're pretty close to ready for heat treat. I haven't put the rough bevels in yet, but the next step is that we have to cut these shoulders in right here. So if you have a file guide, that will fit perfect. This one might fit. It might just slip on there. But if you don't, and you have a vise that the jaws are pretty close to even, it's not a bad way to to get your shoulders cut in pretty close enough that it's going to look decent. When I'm deciding where my shoulders are going to go, if I'm going to do it square with the spine, I usually just take a square and throw it on the spine. My spine's a little curved, but I'll put it close to the back end of it. And then I can just draw a line on here. And then when I put my file guide on, there we go. I can just line my file guide up with that line. And this barely fits, so I'm really hoping that when I tighten this down, I don't strip these bolts out of here, because that would suck. So I'm going to get the bulk of this off with the belt grinder. Then over to my favorite part in the shop, the vise, because it usually means handwork. And I'm kidding. So at this point, it's going to be files until we get this nice and square. So I wanted to talk about files for just a second. So right here I've got, it's a Nicholson file, get them at Home Depot. I use this pretty often because it's just really coarse. And I mean, it's almost done. It's getting pretty dull, but these things are pretty expensive. I can't remember exactly how much I paid for this because it's been a while. But if you go to Harbor Freight, I know, Harbor Freight, horrible. Their files are actually pretty good, and they're $2.99. So you can use these until they're dull and then throw them away or turn them into another tool or a knife or whatever, because, I mean, obviously it's hardenable steel, and people make tools out of hardenable steel. But anyway, these are, I mean, they're not bad, and this isn't sponsored. Obviously, I've got like 1,000 subs, but just trying to help you save a little bit of money. If you're looking for some files, go to Harbor Freight, grab these, super cheap. The only thing I don't like about them is they're not as coarse as this one, and they don't have any that are really coarse. But anyway, you can hear that they cut pretty well. And you can see that they cut pretty well, if that's not in a shadow. But anyway, so I'm going to be here for just a minute, cutting in these shoulders. Okay, I've got my scribe lines, center line, all that good stuff. So I'm going to do some quick bevels, and then after that, we're basically ready for heat treat. So here's a little trick that I believe I heard Jay Nielsen talking about, but hidden tang knives are hard to hold on to. So if you take a pair of vice grips, which these aren't ideal, the shorter nose ones are better, you actually have something that you can grab onto back here and then run it through. Helps a little bit. Okay, I think we're going to call it good right there for this video. I will save the heat treat for the next video. I kind of took a little longer than I thought on this. But anyway, again, just like with the forging, you have to make sure not to do too much at one time, because it's really easy to, when you're cutting in the shoulders of the bolster, the front of the bolster here, it's really easy to mess up and dig into your blade, and then you have like little whoop-de-woos and hoozy hizzies, or I don't know, I'm making up words now, but you just a little bit at a time. If you do that, if you do a little bit and check, do a little bit and check, you're usually going to be just fine, and it's going to come out really nice. But as you can see, you know, we've got some nice crisp lines in here. It was, with the way I do it with the little J belt, it's really easy to get these corners in there, so you don't have to worry about using a file, and you don't have to use a special attachment to make it easier. Just I mean, keep an eye on what you're doing, and you know, check things often, and hopefully you don't go too far and screw it up. But just takes a little practice, like everything else. So we got the profile, we got the back shoulders cut in. That's pretty necessary to do before the heat treat, because that's, I mean, there's probably other ways to do it if you have a mill or whatever, but that's a pre-heat treat thing right there. And then, you know, this can actually be done after the heat treat because you're using an abrasive. But if you're going to file this, you want to do it before. But we're really close to our final thickness, and this is pretty close to where the bevels are going to be. And I might do some other stuff to it. But for now, we're done. This is the rough grind, and we're ready for heat treat. So as usual, thank you for joining me, and we'll see you in the next video.